Rabbi Reuven Vershuvsky's story is one of heroism, courage, faith and resilience in the face of extreme hardship and unrelenting challenges. Hear him describe how he survived behind the Iron Curtain and emerged with his connection to Hashem and His Torah stronger than ever.
My term began on February 1985. Ended on February 19th, 1987. First 6 months I was in Kiev, Lukianovka prison, the famous Kiev prison, under interrogation and the time of trial. 6 months I spent in different cells of Lukianovka prison. Then half a year, close to half a year, in maximum security in Ukraine, near Poltava. And then for the second year, also because of diplomatic efforts, other different diplomatic efforts, I was transferred from maximum security in Ukraine to a minimum security in northern Russia, Shuya. The first year was very difficult. First, because I had no experience. My background, as I was 21 at the time of arrest, and I come from intelligent family. I never heard of Russian prisons. I had no idea what it is, the world inside Russian jail. All experiences were so new to me. I didn't know how to deal with all the difficulties in prison. So first year was difficult. I didn't have anything. I didn't have any sforim, I didn't have tefillin, I didn't have anything. With the exception of Pesach, I had matzahs and some kosher food for Pesach 1 month after arrest, but that's a separate story. We'll talk about it. Other than that, I had a little notebook where I had written whatever I remembered from Siddur, starting from Moedeani all the way into Musafim for Chol HaMoed Pesach. Wherever I could remember by heart, I would write in that school notebook that I had. So I had my handwritten Siddur that I called Mina Ma'amakim. That's it. For the whole year, I didn't have anything else. The second year, besides the fact it was a minimum security, I was already a big mumchamp after 12 years in the system. In different prisons, they kept switching me, they kept transferring me from one prison to another. I spent a lot of prison time in transit, in those special railway cars for prisoners, or prisons on the way from Ukraine to Russia, from Poltava to Kharkov to Yaroslavl to Ryazan to Ivanovo, between those prisons and in those prisons. And after a year, I only spent 12 months in jail, but I knew probably more than average prisoner that spent 12 months because of all that Hadgadia. And they kept me with worse prisoners. They were afraid that I could influence other prisoners. So legally, they had to keep me as a first-time offender. They had to, according to the rules, they had to keep me with first-time offenders. Instead, they kept me with serial killers and repeat offenders and drug dealers and murderers and all types of worse criminals to scare me or to wherever their plan was. At the same time, I was learning some tricks from those worse criminals. I learned how to get things smuggled into prison, how to bribe, how to exchange favors, and how to deal with different problems in prison. So the second year was easier. I had some small number of sforim in prison. I had tefillin, and again the second Pesach I had matzahs and kosher food. Both years Sukkos I didn't have anything, not a sukkah, not arba minim. Baruch Hashem, both Pesach I had matzahs and some kosher food. Second Rosh Hashanah I had a shofar. Yom Kippur was difficult, but Baruch Hashem, it gelungen, was siyata d'shmaya that I got sick, very sick before Yom Kippur, so I had excuse not to work on Yom Kippur. I had different plans in my head, but Rabbeinu Shalom had his plan. I had a very high fever and food poisoning before Yom Kippur. I have to say that at the time I was arrested, my wife was expecting a baby. She was 9 months pregnant. And exactly a month after I was arrested, she gave birth to my first son, Pinchas. And there was a heroic effort on the side of my mother-in-law that she figured out how to come to that prison. And I have to mention that on that day that my wife gave birth to our first child, I was transferred from Lukyanovka prison to a psychiatric prison. Other prisoners, they're so afraid of the word psychiatric prison, they don't want to mention the name, to mention that word, because people don't come back from that. Regular prison, at least you have a term, you know when your term ends. In psychiatric prison, there is no term. People don't come back. They could make you into animal within 2 weeks. With their injections, they could make you into animal, if not a vegetable, within 2 weeks. And horror stories. Zashkocha Protis. In my case, it was a Yeshua. Imagine what I felt when I was told that I'm being taken to psychiatric prison. Prisoners in my cell, they said goodbye to me like they were parting with a dead person at the funeral. Instead, it was a change to better. First of all, in psychiatric prison, you have a real bed. Instead of a bunk with nothing on it, you have a pillow, mattress, and a pillow and a blanket. Instead of a cell without any window, you have a window with metal bars. And outside the building, 6-meter high wall. You can't see anything outside, but at least you can see skies and clouds and birds. It's a big change after 1 month in Lukyanovka in the maximum security work. You don't know what time of day it is. You lose count of days altogether. You're not sure if today is Shabbos or not, or you made a mistake. You don't know what's the weather outside, and it's very depressing. The light is on 24 hours. You have to sleep with bright light on. All you together with 36 people, and forget about that they are worse criminals. They smoke, and I don't, and there is no ventilation. So they themselves, they suffocate every time all of them smoke. And what about me? And psychiatric jail that has linen and pillows and ventilation and windows. And besides, there was a way to smuggle in. It was mamash siyata dishmaya that Pesach, Pinchas was born Kov Zayin Oder. So I was transferred there 2 weeks before Pesach, and I spent there a month in that psychiatric prison. And that's where I started learning how to bribe, how to exchange favors, how to send letters, how to send little notes, how to shoot with little notes outside over that 6-meter high wall. On the same day, I was transferred to psychiatric jail. As soon as I settled in my cell, and big thing, I had opportunity to choose a bed, and I chose the bed next to the radiator. And by the way, there they have radiators, unlike a prison cell that has no heating or almost no heating. Normal radiator heating. So I took a bed next to radiator, because after that freezer cell I had my knees killing me. As soon as I settle in the cell, guard comes, calls my name, and he says, I congratulate you. Your wife gave birth to a boy. When I was informed that I have a son, I made sure I write my mother-in-law a note, and I used a special way of shooting a piece of paper over that wall. And I wrote in that note that the name is Pinchas. They should name it Pinchas. They should use Reb Motul, ask Reb Motul in Moscow for a moil. And they did. My mother-in-law and my wife, they contacted Reb Motul. Reb Motul gave them another name. They called Leningrad. Somebody came from Leningrad to Kiev, a moil, and he made a bris on Pinchas. I decided on the name even before I got married, because one thing I knew about my ancestors, with one little piece of information, my grandmother, she told me that when she was a young girl, her mother kept telling her, Hanele, you should be proud, you are granddaughter of a big Goen. And I asked my grandmother, what was your grandfather's first name? And she said, Pinchas. Okay, so I decided that my first son will be named Pinchas. So they called a person from St. Petersburg, at that time it was Leningrad, to come to Kiev. Person came, they had a bris, and again, when they were leaving the apartment, when guests were leaving the apartment after the bris, they were all photographed with a flash from a building across. And when that person, the moil, he was leaving, he slept over by my in-laws in Kiev, and he checked on a baby. Next day, in the morning, and he was about to leave for the airport with his bag with the tools. All of a sudden, he came back into apartment, and he said, "You know what? I decide I'll leave my bag here." So he came back to leave his briefcase with all the tools, and then he went to the airport. And in the airport, they were waiting for him with a search. He was strip searched. In the airport, they were looking for tools. That he is a moil and he has to carry his tools, and that would be a big case. Instead, they didn't find. So he had mamash intuition.